The following program is a production of the Hennepin County Library.
Hello, I'm Kevin Crossley Holland, poet and writer for children, and my guest today, I'm delighted to say, is Barry Lopez, distinguished American writer who is best known for his writing about human relationships and the physical landscape. And rather than giving you a formal introduction to immensely celebrated books like Arctic Dreams, which won the National Book Award, and Wolves and Men, I'd like to tell you that he's one of those writers who not only appeals to an enormously wide constituency and deeply interests people who are interested in environmental issues, interests people who are involved in the literary essay, those who are involved in books for children, but also has one of those passionate private followings, so that in England, where I come from, and in America, I know dozens of people who hug Barry to themselves like a kind of secret and read every word that he writes. And rather than reviewing his books in any kind of programmatic way, I want to ask him at once how it is that he approaches the whole business of the writing process. I don't mean how he drafts his books, but rather when he addresses himself, for instance, to Arctic Dreams or to his present project, which takes him to the Antarctic, or at least to the south, what's the process? Where does it begin, Barry?
It always begins in ignorance. And I think as I've grown older, I probably have become more self-conscious. You can't help but notice that someone has read work of yours and they say something to you about it, and if someone compliments you, it always makes me feel very nervous because I know that in order to work well, I have to continue to think of myself as a person who is both innocent of a place that I'm going to and ignorant. My basic plan of approach with any place I go to is to begin reading what other people have had to say about it from as many different points of view as I can. What have explorers said about this place, and who were those explorers and what cultures did they come from, which influenced the way they saw the place? What did indigenous people say about this place? What have art historians, if ever, or landscape painters, or whatever odds and ends I could find? I even read pulp literature. You know, I'm working in Australia now, and one of the things I've been reading is a series of pulp novels set in the 30s and the 40s in Australia, because in a pulp novel there's no self-consciousness about expressing racism, for example. So you'll get a cleaner picture of out-bush milieu in the Northern Territory by reading pulp literature of the 20s and 30s than you will get by reading some protective tract that wants to pretend there was never any racism. So I begin by doing a lot of reading. Then I go to the place and I travel there with people as guides. I make myself a student, an apprentice. I try to choose good tutors, and I try to remind myself, you're here to ask questions, not to find answers. You're here to listen. No one's really interested in what you think, so you don't need to talk. Just be here and absorb this place and listen to people who know more about it than you do.
So really it's an act of humility, and one in which one is intensely vulnerable.
Yes, well, it's very much like being that way with another person, I think. I've often thought that. I mean, some people might, I don't know if that carries very well for some people, but when you first meet someone, and you, as a man meets a woman, and you begin to fall in love, part of the excitement is being vulnerable to someone you trust. And I think you can trust naively, but you can also trust intelligently. And I find my way to people I can trust, and I try to become vulnerable to them so that they feel free to share openly with me. And as they get to know me, they realize that I'm not a person who's interested in gossip or exposing human beings, or I have no ulterior motives other than to learn. And I find after several weeks, people share everything. And then what I can do as a writer or what I most enjoy doing is if you're with somebody traveling somewhere for 2 or 3 weeks, you'll see that they have moods and temper tantrums or things go wrong. You know, we're all human like that. I'm not interested in that. Everybody knows that. What I want to find is when in this 2 or 3 week period did this person really shine? When did this person express herself or himself in such a way that in that moment they felt everything they dreamed they could be or wanted to be as a scientist or whatever it was, that comes out of them. And then if I take that and can put it into language, then another person in another continent can read that and say, that's my kind of integrity. I'd like to behave like that too.
So you're approaching a physical landscape and the life in that land, on that land, down various spokes.
Yes.
Coming to the same hub.
Yes.
My sense is that some of those spokes are the spokes of scientific precision.
Yes.
And other spokes are spokes of the human imagination.
Yes.
Can you say something about the wholeness of how one must look at the land?
I think that my position, which is just my position, it's not like everyone thinks this way, but the position from which I work is that I would say something like the land is the face of God. And by that I mean that it's apparent, but in the same moment that it's apparent, it's utterly mysterious. You can describe it to some extent, but you can't encompass it. And so you should avail yourself, or I would say to myself, you must avail yourself of every way of knowing that is possible for you, both because you're trying to understand something that is always going to be a mystery, and because people who come to books, who read books, have varied backgrounds, and your choice of a tool of approach or analysis might not be one that they trust or that they think is best. So if I go to a place, for example, of wolves and men, if I look at wolves through the eyes of scientists, of field biologists, and then I ask Inuit people, when you see that animal, what do you see? And stay long enough so that they can answer at their own pace, then I begin to see that here are two different ways of knowing, no one of which to me is more important. I think that we tend to say that science is the one and only way to look at the world, and it's a good way, but it is by no means the only way. It is a very young way. It has a very brief history, and we've learned enough now in particle physics to warn us that it's flawed, like every other way of knowing. And to me, if you're going to talk about things like international cooperation in economics or politics or whatever it happens to be, you must be willing to say all other ways of knowing the mystery of being alive and leading a good and worthy life must be heard if we're going to cooperate. No one person can stand up and say, my way's best. That's colonialism, you know, and the world has paid a god-awful price for colonialism in every shape and form, not just the colonialism of powerful nations that occupied other countries, but of one gender that overtakes another gender and colonizes in a very real sense that gender, saying, you will be heard only when you speak my language. And what has happened to minority groups in North America or in England or in Australia or in Africa. If you don't say that everyone has a possibility of saying something incredible about the face of God, then to say that you know the face of God or that you have some sense of it is naive. You don't.
So then this hub seems to depend on expecting to be heard, learning to listen,
Yes.
on a tolerance, on a mutual
Yes.
reciprocity.
Yes, very much.
And what are the issues that inform your writing, no matter whether you're ostensibly writing for children, or at least it's being perceived as such,
Right.
Crow and Weasel, or writing a literary essay or a short story? One often finds with writers, and I think it's true in your case, true in mine, and that there are central issues that one is preoccupied with no matter what literary form one adopts.
Yes.
Can you help me to understand what those
I would say
issues
the word
are?
you used, tolerance. I'm interested in tolerance. What does it mean to be tolerant? What is that all about? Is it any good thing to be doing, for example? I mean, I don't say everybody should be tolerant. I just am curious about that. How does being tolerant flavor or color your life? I'm interested in dignity. What does it mean to lead a dignified life? I think at the moment what I'm most focused on is hope. How is it that we become hopeful? I have said on several occasions that I'm a writer interested in participating in a literature of hope, in the creation of a literature of hope. And I don't mean writing stories that you close the book and say, oh, everything's going to work out. No, but...
What does it mean then?
It means that when you close the book, you have a sense of your own worth and the possibility for you as a human being to lead a worthy life. That's what I mean by hope. Not optimism, not here's a ground plan, here's how all the world's problems are going to be solved, which is ridiculous. But when you close a book or you finish a poem or you finish an essay and you put it down and you have a sense that your life is possible, that what you wish to do with your life is possible, then I think you have a sense of hope. And if you're hopeful about yourself and your spouse and your children, your family, your community, that eventually extends so that you're hopeful about the world's fate.
Yes, I mean, in the very last page of Crow and Weasel, you say, our journey, seeing different ways of life, has made me wonder about many things, said Weasel. They stood in silence together, their breath rising in a fog. And then right at the very end, Weasel says very softly, it is good to be alive, to have friends, to have a family, to have children, to live in a particular place. These relationships are sacred. And it seems to me that what you're describing is, again, the laying of oneself open through making a journey in a state of wonder,
yes,
but in a state of intelligent wonder rather than gawping.
Yes.
And that is what can make life possible to go on, makes one value these everyday. It's almost a journey in order to come home.
Yes, I think of a lot of my work, particularly now because I'm traveling so far away, lots of time in Antarctica and Australia and Africa. I myself wonder, I mean, people say to me, why are you always so far away? Why do you go these tremendous distances and then come home? I live in a small, I mean, it's not even a town. I live along a river in Oregon, and it's a very rural area.
And you've lived in Oregon for?
25 years. Sandra and I have been there for 25 years.
Mm.
I think that one of the reasons I leave home is to break up the pattern of the familiar in my mind, to startle myself. When you asked earlier, what is the way in which you prepare to travel, or how do you travel, I consciously look for ways to put myself at risk intellectually, not so much physically, because that's not, I've just never been a person. I mean, I've worked at the South Pole and been in incredibly difficult physical circumstances with people, but that's not, I don't do that because I'm some kind of adventurer or something. I've got to do those things in order to be with the people who are going to teach me about those places. What the risks that I want are, if I think that I have something put together well.
Still, let me press this point. I mean, why that place, these places, Arctic and Antarctic, rather than the state next door to Oregon? Are you deliberately setting yourself formidable challenges? I mean, after all, the Beowulf poet 1,000 years ago said that to achieve something worthwhile, you must go to far off lands.
Mm.
No one wins renown by killing a sheep. I mean, you've got to kill a dragon
Yes.
to win renown. I mean, is there some sense that you're pushing yourself?
I think actually there could be, but I begin to wonder now if it doesn't have to do with something that's very simple, and it's space. Someone once asked me, why do you write so much about deserts and the Arctic and the Antarctic? And when I look, where have I been traveling recently? In the Namib Desert in Namibia, in the Kalahari Desert, in the deserts in the Northern Territory in Australia. in the interior of Antarctica, in the Weddell Sea in winter. There are all of these huge open landscapes, and you could call them classic landscapes in the sense that the line is very simple, as opposed to the line in the Amazon basin, which is tremendously convoluted and complex with many layers of animals and birds and insects and whatnot. That's not an environment where I feel I can think through these things that are on my mind. I'm more comfortable in these unpopulated, very open, to me, not barren places. And when I look at my mail and I see how often I hear from painters and from architects and from landscape architects, what I see in our correspondence is an interest in how human life fills space, or how do people place themselves in space and in time. And the work that I'm doing now, in fact, in several years ago, 1988, I received support from the Guggenheim Foundation for a work that was titled The Scale of Human Time in Remote Places. What I was trying to look at is, how do we appreciate the passage of time? How do we sense ourselves growing older, or with time on our hands, or in a timeless mood, given the geographical space around us? For example, with Darwin, one of the first things that I hope this isn't too abstract, but Darwin was not just someone who gave us a so-called theory of evolution. He is a crucial figure in the history of Western thought, because he tried to give us a way to think that change, rather than stasis or steadiness, was normal. And when you ask, how did a young man like this come up with an idea like that, I think part of an answer is that he went to sea aboard the Beagle right after he had read the work of Charles Lyell. And Lyell is the first geologist to create a timeless space in which the Earth evolved. So when Darwin left England, he had time on his hands in which to construct a theory. And when he was aboard that ship in the Atlantic and the Pacific and crossing the Indian Ocean, he had enormous amounts of space. So the journey gave him space in which to think, and Charles Lyell gave him the time in which to think. And given those two expansive movements in his thought, it was easier for him to come to an idea about change over time. Mm-hmm. I don't think Darwin's insight to me is brilliant. It's one of the great historically one of the great pieces of thinking about where we are, and not obviously to put myself in any parallel with Darwin or any level with Darwin, but I think what has attracted me as a writer over the years is what is the nature of time and space inside story. I know that those things affect me when I look at language. I know that if someone were to say to you, what is literature all about? A quick answer would be memory. It's about what is remembered, why we remember it, and why we remember it and pass it on. And memory has much to do with time and space. So I keep making, and when I began traveling with Pinjinjar people and Aranda people and Walpuri people in the Northern Territory, I was interested in dream time because it's a way of imagining oneself in time. So it's all very complicated in a way, but
let me ask you, this is an adjacent topic, but it arises, or it'll lead back to what you're talking about now. You've talked about the way in which the role of the writer is partly to rekindle memory.
Yes.
Time again. But you've also talked about the responsibility of the writer in society, and indeed society's responsibility to the writer.
Yes.
How do you see the role, or your own role, in American society now?
It's relatively simple for me. I'm a man who has food and air and water from a landscape that is tended by my neighbors in one way or another. I go to a store, I buy a loaf of bread. I go to a theater and I see a performance. So in all these ways, I'm indebted to my neighbors who are actors or whatever it is they do. I'm fed both food and in the mind by the things that other people do. If I pick up something that's beautifully made, or I see someone do a beautiful piece of work, if I see anything beautiful, that feeds me. And it tells me all relationships, good relationships must be reciprocal. I owe back. So as a writer, I have to think, what can you give back? How can you respond to all that you've been given?
There was a time, though, I mean, when the writer knew precisely what his or her place in society was.
Yes, I think that's confused.
That's not so now.
No, I think, I mean, obviously the cult of celebrityism in the United States has confused it, and I think things are confused because we're obsessed with the rights and the privileges of the individual rather than the responsibilities of the individual to society. And I'm concerned about the writer's responsibility to society because I was trained, I think, oddly, more by indigenous people about what it meant to be a storyteller than I was trained by people at the universities I was at. I was trained to a way of thinking about writing where, for example, a man would say, you're the storyteller as long as the stories that you tell help. So that's what's in the back of my mind as a guide for how to behave. And so when I'm traveling in a remote place, I think to myself, you have the privilege to be here. And you are here because other people who are at home with their children or working at jobs that keep them in one building or one place all the time can't go. And if you have that privilege to be here, then part of your responsibility is not to come up with a theory about anything or to say what your opinion is having been there, but to tell other people what you saw. What was it like?
Do you get the feedback that you need, not to boost one's ego, but rather to enable one to know where one stands within the society of which one forms part?
I think it's harder than it might be because the world of literature is politicized to some extent. Some people are obsessed with competing for prizes and standing in the artistic community and whatnot. Frankly, I think in the West where I live, there's a minimum of that. A number of people have commented to me how poets and prose writers are much more cordial with each other in the West because there's very little, there's just a very different environment about the way people relate to each other. And I think that as a young writer, you're confused.
But I think that could be true of the Midwest too.
Well,
I mean,
maybe
I think
that,
we're
I can't say that because I don't live in the Midwest.
Of New York and so on.
It's a different emphasis on what your life is, and I think that if I have some feeling in my heart for younger writers, it's this confusion they meet when they're young about judgment and that they're going to be judged, and right away at the age of 20 or 25 someone is going to decide whether you're worth supporting or whether your voice is an artistic voice or something like that, instead of just leaving people alone to write. And after a while, I mean, you have the marketplace and all those problems, but I think writing is a way of life. It's not a job or a career or something. It is a way of life, and it's almost by an accident that you have an income and these other things. I mean, I don't mean to be cavalier about not having money and it's good to be poor or some ridiculous thing like that. I think people who write, or whom I know who are writers, are so driven to write that would never change, no matter what their circumstances were. And what you hope for is circumstances that help you write.
Both in America and I think in Europe, writers have shown in the last, of non-fiction and fiction, in the last generation, an extraordinary absorption with themselves.
Yes.
And with the process of writing. But I sense at the heart of your writing something that is not the least interested in the ego, or in the end, in the process, and which, rather like the role of the poet in ancient societies like the Greeks or the Anglo-Saxons, or rather like oral cultures today, rather the writer is the living tradition, the walking embodiment of the history of the tribe. He's speaking for the society. He has a crucial social relevance. I mean, is that the sort of role you aspire towards?
I would say only if the notion that somebody speaks for society is ridiculous to me, because it must be that society says, speak for us. Society must choose you to speak. You can't decide that you will be the spokesman for society. It has to, I think what happens for me, for example, I go someplace and write a story, the story's published in a magazine or it becomes a book, people read it, I look at my mail or I get feedback of some sort, and I try to sense, have I done this well? And if I do it well again, it's people saying, well, this was well done again, and we'd like to hear what more you have to say. It's like that man who said, as your stories, you're the storyteller, your stories have to help. And the other part of what he said is when your stories no longer help, you're not the storyteller, even if you say you are. And that's a crucial part of that man's sentiment, that society has to have some way to say, the stories that you're telling have helped us. Obviously not everybody, because no one can speak well to everyone. Yes. But a part of society says, among this group of writers, that we find these people are helpful. Their stories help us. They give us a sense of hope. They're stories that we can share with our children. They give us a sense of possibility. We feel more. I don't know how to say this without. I think what I'm trying to do is to make people aware of their own, the way in which they're connected to what is holy.
So that writing is an act of piety, of revelation, of celebration, and horrible to say, we've got 1 minute left, and I want to ask you one more question, and that is, here we are in the Midwest, the northern Midwest. Can you, having spent so long in northern climes, and especially in the Arctic, say what north means to you without, it's almost impossible to reduce it to a nutshell, but if I give you the word north, what words would you give back to me?
It's not a matter of words as much as it is a matter of images. I think of north as a direction of clarity, that I see a movement into a landscape that opens and is clarified with a lot of what is inessential or frivolous stripped away. It's a very clean, hard movement. It's a very hard edge, an exhilarating environment in which to be. And this is my prejudice, but I think of going farther south as a kind of deterioration. I don't mean to disparage, but you know, it's heat and humidity, and things soften and become quiet, and there's a much harder edge in the north.
Barry Lopez, thank you very much for coming to Minnesota.
Thank you, Kevin.
And to the Hennepin Libraries.
Thanks.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.